The boardroom at Oak Valley General Hospital was silent, save for the nervous shuffle of papers. Richard Sloan, the hospital administrator, leaned back in his chair, confident smirk plastered across his face. Moments earlier, he had arrogantly dismissed a claim, laughing at the idea that a woman like her could possibly challenge him. But now, his smirk faltered. Across the polished oak table, Victoria Langston rose to her full height. Calm, composed and commanding, she slid a document across the table, the board's unanimous vote, signed and sealed. Her voice carried the weight of authority as she declared, "Mr. Sloan, effective immediately, you are terminated from your position as hospital administrator." Gasps rippled through the room. Sloan's face drained of color as realization hit. The woman he had mocked as powerless minutes earlier was not just any patient advocate. She was the board chair herself, and she had just ended his career with a single sentence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Victoria Langston had always believed in quiet strength. For decades, she had carried herself with dignity, never raising her voice unless absolutely necessary. Her life had been a series of battles. Some fought openly in courtrooms, others fought quietly in boardrooms where the stakes were higher than anyone dared admit. But for all her accomplishments, her proudest title wasn't chairwoman or doctor. It was simply Mom, her son. Marcus Langston was a bright, athletic 16-year-old with a love for robotics and basketball. He had inherited his mother's sharp mind and her late husband's easy smile. To Victoria, Marcus represented everything she had fought for: opportunity, stability, and a future unshackled by the limitations society often tried to impose. That's why she had rushed to Oak Valley General Hospital on a rainy Thursday afternoon with fear in her chest. Marcus had collapsed during practice at school, his coach calling the ambulance when he complained of shortness of breath and dizziness. Though his condition wasn't immediately life-threatening, every second waiting in the emergency room felt like hours. The hospital itself stood as a monument to wealth and prestige. Oak Valley General wasn't just any hospital, it was the hospital. The kind of place local politicians bragged about funding. The kind of place wealthy donors used to cement their legacy with plaques on the walls. Its gleaming glass lobby and marble floors were designed to impress, not comfort. For years, Victoria had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that Oak Valley balanced its reputation with accessibility. That it treated not just the powerful, but the vulnerable. But like so many institutions, its glossy exterior hid cracks of arrogance and indifference. As she waited at the reception desk, filling out forms with Marcus's details, Victoria noticed the subtle shift in the clerk's tone when she listed her home address, Oak Ridge Heights. An affluent neighborhood, yes, but one where she had been one of the first black homeowners. That detail, paired with her straightforward but calm demeanor, seemed to trigger something unspoken, a quiet doubt about whether she belonged. Still, she brushed it aside. Her focus was on Marcus. "Your insurance card?" the clerk asked briskly. Victoria slid the card across the counter without hesitation. It was comprehensive coverage, the kind executives envied. Yet the clerk frowned, as if searching for an excuse to dismiss it. She tapped the keyboard a few times, her expression morphing into one of exaggerated concern. "I'm not seeing approval for this admission," the clerk finally announced. Her voice just loud enough for those in the waiting area to hear. Victoria's brows knit. "That's not possible. We've had this coverage for years, and Oak Valley is in network. Could you check again?" The clerk sighed, motioning toward a man striding confidently across the lobby. "You'll have to speak with Administrator Sloan." Richard Sloan was everything Oak Valley's glossy brochures projected, tall, sharply dressed, and full of self-importance. He had been administrator for nearly a decade, known for his charm at donor galas and his ruthless efficiency behind closed doors. To most, he was untouchable. "Mrs. Langston, is it?" he asked, his tone carrying the faint patronization of someone accustomed to authority. "Yes, my son was admitted a few minutes ago." "The clerk says there's an issue with our insurance, which I know isn't correct." Sloan barely glanced at the card she handed him. Instead, his eyes swept over her attire, a simple blouse and slacks dampened by the rain. Nothing about her screaming executive or board member. To him, she was just another patient's parent. "Unfortunately, this plan doesn't cover the services your son will likely need. We can proceed if you're able to arrange payment up front." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Victoria felt a familiar heat rising inside her chest. Years of navigating dismissive tones in conference rooms and negotiations had trained her to stay composed, but the stakes here weren't abstract policies or contracts. "This was her son." "That's not correct," she replied evenly. "This plan is fully accepted here. I know the contracts myself." Sloan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Ma'am, I understand this is stressful, but insurance policies are complicated. Maybe your husband usually handles these matters." The words landed like a slap. Victoria inhaled slowly, forcing her voice to remain calm. "My husband passed away 8 years ago, and I assure you, I understand these matters perfectly." But Sloan had already dismissed her. Turning to the clerk, he said, "Mark her file pending. Without upfront payment, her son can remain under observation in the ER until we clarify." It was humiliation, wrapped in bureaucracy, the kind designed to remind people of their place. Around them, a few other families looked on, some sympathetic, others indifferent. To Sloan, it was routine. To Victoria, it was a warning shot, a reminder of the prejudice she had spent a lifetime fighting. Her instinct screamed to reveal her position, to snap the illusion of his superiority with one sentence, "I am your boss." But she didn't, not yet. Because true power wasn't in shouting titles, it was in choosing the moment to strike. Nurse Allison Green, who had been quietly observing from behind the desk, slipped Victoria a reassuring glance as she guided Marcus into a treatment bay. "We'll take good care of him, ma'am," she whispered. Victoria nodded, grateful, though her mind burned with anger. She thought of the hospital's mission statement engraved in the lobby: excellence, compassion, integrity. Hollow words when filtered through men like Sloan. As she sat beside Marcus, watching him breathe more steadily after oxygen was administered, her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, meetings postponed, reports waiting. But her world had shrunk to one hospital room, one injustice. She didn't yet know that Sloan's arrogance, his casual cruelty, had just set into motion a chain of events that would not only end his career, but expose the cracks in Oak Valley's pristine reputation. And when the reckoning came, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be heard in every boardroom, courtroom, and press room in the city, because Victoria Langston was not just a worried mother. She was the chairwoman of the Oak Valley Board of Trustees. And Richard Sloan had just made the mistake of his career. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The hours dragged on. Marcus lay on the narrow hospital bed, his chest rising and falling steadily now, but the color hadn't fully returned to his face. A monitor beeped softly at his side. Nurse Allison checked his vitals every half hour, her touch gentle, her words reassuring. Still, the anxiety gnawed at Victoria. She wasn't just a mother at her son's bedside. She was a strategist, watching a system reveal its cracks in real time. By now, she had expected the insurance issue to be resolved. Oak Valley's billing system was state-of-the-art, contracts carefully negotiated by her board just last year. She knew every detail of the policy, every provider network clause. There was no way Marcus's admission wasn't covered. Yet the clerk's words echoed, "Mark her file pending, pending," as if her son's life was an invoice waiting for approval. Just after 6, Richard Sloan returned. His presence filled the doorway before he even spoke. His voice carried the smug authority of a man unaccustomed to being questioned. "Well," he began, glancing at Marcus as though he were inspecting a file rather than a boy, "I reviewed your case personally. Your insurance carrier hasn't confirmed coverage. Until then, advanced testing will remain unavailable." Victoria stood. Her tone was measured, but her eyes burned with restrained fury. Administrator Sloan, my son collapsed during athletic practice. His doctor will need more than observation. You're withholding tests that could identify a heart condition or worse. Sloan adjusted his cufflinks, a small gesture that screamed condescension. Mrs. Langston, I understand you're worried, but policies exist for a reason. We can't simply provide expensive procedures without financial clearance. Unless you'd like to place a personal payment on file. The word personal dripped with insinuation. It wasn't just about money. It was about power. Victoria drew a steady breath. And if something happens to my son while you delay care... Sloan's lips curled into a half-smile. Then the liability would rest with your insurer, not us. That's why families need to plan ahead. The cruelty of the statement hit like a punch. He wasn't just denying care. He was mocking her, reducing her son's crisis to a business transaction. Around them, other families in the ER shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others watching closely. Nurse Allison stepped forward, unable to stay silent. Sir, with respect, Dr. Ortiz has already ordered an echocardiogram. Delaying could risk. Sloan cut her off sharply. Nurse Green, you may return to your station. I'll handle this. His tone was laced with warning, the kind meant to silence. Allison hesitated, then met Victoria's eyes, offering a silent apology before retreating. Marcus stirred on the bed, his voice weak. Mom, it's okay. Don't worry about it, but Victoria couldn't let it go. I want this documented, she said firmly. You are refusing medically necessary care for a minor, despite clear coverage. And you're aware that She stopped herself. The temptation to reveal who she was burned on her tongue, but she swallowed it. Not yet, Sloan arched a brow, amused. Aware that you what? Work in healthcare? Know someone on the inside? You'll find Oak Valley runs on more than threats and complaints, Mrs. Langston. We run on policies, and those policies are not in your favor. It was mockery disguised as professionalism, the kind of performance he likely gave countless families who lacked the knowledge or resources to fight back. To him, she was just another powerless voice in a sea of grievances. The deeper injustice wasn't just the denial of care, it was the pattern. She could see it in his smirk, hear it in his tone. He had done this before, probably hundreds of times. People who didn't fit his vision of Oak Valley, people who weren't wealthy, connected, or the right kind of patient, were treated like burdens. Victoria's chest tightened not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination dressed as policy. Administrator Sloan, she said slowly, choosing each word with precision, I want everything you've said recorded in my son's chart. Word for word, he chuckled, shaking his head. Mrs. Langston, I think you've misunderstood how this works. We document medical facts, not emotional outbursts. Her jaw tightened. I'm not emotional. I'm factual. You are refusing treatment. Put it in writing. For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. He wasn't used to pushback. Just then, Dr. Samuel Ortiz entered the room, clipboard in hand. A seasoned physician with decades of experience, Ortiz commanded respect without raising his voice. Richard, I've reviewed the case. Marcus needs an echocardiogram tonight, not tomorrow. Delays could put him at risk, Sloan's expression soured. Sam, with all due respect, you know the policy. We can't proceed without financial clearance. Ortiz's gaze hardened. Policies exist to protect the hospital, not to endanger children. If you block this test, you'll be putting your career on the line. The administrator's lips thinned. Are you threatening me? I'm reminding you of your duty, Ortiz replied evenly. Victoria watched the exchange, her resolve deepening. She wasn't alone. There were cracks in Sloan's authority, even among his peers, but Sloan doubled down. Doctor, if you proceed without approval, the liability will fall on you. Is that a risk you're prepared to take? Ortiz's silence spoke volumes. Even a man of integrity was bound by the system's chains. And Sloan knew it. Victoria placed a hand on her son's shoulder, her voice low but unshaken. Marcus, listen to me. You're going to be okay. I promise. In that moment, she wasn't just speaking to him. She was making a vow to herself. Richard Sloan thought he had won. He thought he had silenced her, humiliated her, reduced her to another desperate parent with no recourse. But Victoria Langston had spent a lifetime preparing for moments like this. And though she hadn't yet revealed it, she held a power far greater than Sloan could imagine, a power that, soon enough, would turn his smirk into silence. Night had fallen over Oak Valley General, the city lights glittering through the high windows of the ER. Inside, the fluorescent glow was harsh, sterile, unforgiving. Victoria sat rigid in the uncomfortable chair beside Marcus's bed, her fingers laced tightly together in her lap. He had drifted into a light sleep, the oxygen easing his breathing, but his brow was still furrowed, as if even in dreams he felt the weight of uncertainty. Victoria's mind raced. She had led negotiations for multi-million-dollar hospital expansions, had stared down corporate executives twice Sloan's size. Yet here she was, treated like a nuisance in the very institution she helped govern. And all because Richard Sloan had decided that her son, and by extension she, didn't belong. A sharp knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. The intake clerk stepped in, holding a clipboard. She avoided Victoria's gaze as she placed the form on the counter. "Mrs. Langston," she said stiffly, "this is a consent form acknowledging that you've been informed your son's insurance is not sufficient for further treatment. You'll need to sign before we can continue observation." Victoria blinked. "Observation? Not testing?" The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "That's all we can do until payment is secured." The paper was a trap, a bureaucratic noose disguised as procedure. Signing it would be an admission that Sloan's denial was valid, a record that could later be used to absolve the hospital of responsibility. Her voice dropped, calm but sharp. "Do you understand what you're asking me to sign? This is a waiver that says I accept negligence." The clerk's face flushed. I'm just following instructions." Victoria slid the paper back across the counter, then returned it to whoever gave them. "I don't sign away my child's life." The clerk left quickly, but not before casting her a look that mingled pity with fear. Hours later, Sloan returned, this time with 2 security officers trailing behind him. The sight made Marcus stir, opening his eyes in confusion. "What's happening?" he asked groggily. Victoria stroked his hair gently. "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." Sloan clasped his hands behind his back, his voice dripping with rehearsed professionalism. "Mrs. Langston, I must insist we resolve this matter. Non-compliance creates a liability for the hospital. If you continue to refuse the required documentation, we may have to discharge your son." The words slammed into her like a physical blow. "Discharge? For a child who had collapsed hours earlier." Her voice trembled for the first time, though with anger, not fear. "You would send a sick boy into the night because of a clerical decision you know is wrong." Sloan's smirk widened. "This hospital serves thousands. We cannot allow individuals to exploit loopholes for free care." Behind him, the guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to being props in bureaucratic intimidation. Marcus's voice was small but steady. Please. I don't need tests. Let's just go." Victoria's heart broke at the resignation in his tone. Her son, who had always believed in fairness, in working hard, was already learning the bitter lesson of being doubted, dismissed, diminished. She crouched beside him, taking his hand. "No, Marcus, you deserve the same care as anyone else. Don't ever believe otherwise." She rose to face Sloan. Her words were measured, each one striking like a hammer. "If you discharge him, you will regret it." "That is a promise," Sloan chuckled, mistaking her restraint for weakness. "Empty threats don't change policy, Mrs. Langston. Sign the form or prepare to leave." The humiliation was complete. Even Dr. Ortiz, who had tried earlier to intervene, was powerless now. He caught Victoria's eye from across the hall, his expression filled with quiet apology. In that moment, she felt the weight of every patient who had sat in this same chair, powerless before the machinery of policy and prejudice. How many had been silenced by paperwork? How many had been shamed into leaving? She was living what so many before her had endured. the systemic dismissal of people who didn't fit the image Sloan wanted for Oak Valley General. This wasn't about insurance. It never had been. It was about control. It was about reminding her of a place he believed she occupied, beneath him. By midnight, Victoria had exhausted every official channel. Calls to the insurance provider confirmed her coverage, but the hospital refused to accept the verbal approval. Requests to speak with the on-call billing supervisor were ignored. Every door she knocked on led back to the same man, Richard Sloan, and Sloan reveled in it. He lingered near the nurse's station, chatting loudly about policy abusers and non-compliant families, ensuring she could hear every word. It was theatre designed to shame. At one point, Nurse Allison quietly brought Victoria a cup of coffee, her hands trembling as she set it down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wish I could do more." Victoria squeezed her hand. "You've done more than you know, because compassion in small doses mattered." It reminded her that Sloane's arrogance wasn't absolute, but the night ended with Marcus still in a bed that wasn't his, waiting for tests he hadn't received. Victoria sat beside him, her back aching, her dignity bruised, her fury carefully bottled. She had endured the full weight of Sloane's mockery and humiliation, and still she hadn't revealed who she was. Because timing mattered. Power wasn't in reacting. It was in waiting for the precise moment to strike. As dawn's first light crept through the blinds, Sloan passed through the ward one last time, pausing just long enough to deliver his parting shot. "Mrs. Langston, I suggest you consider transferring your son to another facility if you're unhappy. Oak Valley is selective, after all, selective." The word hung in the air, a thin veil for exclusion. Victoria said nothing. She simply met his gaze, unblinking, until he finally turned away. Inside, though, her resolve crystallized into steel. Sloan had mistaken her silence for surrender, but in truth, she was preparing the very stage where his arrogance would collapse. And when that moment came, the man who had mocked her son's life as a liability would learn exactly who Victoria Langston was. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Oak Valley General, glinting off the polished floors as nurses changed shifts and doctors hurried to their rounds. For most, it was just another day in the city's most prestigious hospital. For Victoria Langston, it was the morning after humiliation, the calm before revelation. She sat upright at Marcus's bedside, her dark blazer draped over her shoulders. She had sent Nurse Allison home hours earlier with a quiet word of thanks and a promise she didn't explain. Now, as Marcus stirred awake, she smiled softly, though her eyes carried the weight of the night before. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better," he whispered, though his voice was still weak. "I don't want you to fight them anymore, Mom. It's not worth it." Her heart clenched. He was too young to sound so tired of the world. She squeezed his hand gently. "Everything worth doing comes with a fight, Marcus. Don't ever forget that." At 9 a.m., her phone buzzed with a reminder. Oak Valley Board of Trustees, quarterly review meeting. The irony was not lost on her. Hours earlier, she'd been treated as a nuisance in this very building. Now, she was scheduled to sit at the head of its most powerful table. Victoria rose, smoothing her blouse, and kissed Marcus on the forehead. "I'll be back shortly. Dr. Ortiz will check on you." "Where are you going?" Marcus asked. She smiled faintly. "To make sure this doesn't happen again. To you, or anyone else." The boardroom was located on the top floor of the administrative wing, a stark contrast to the clinical chaos of the ER. Mahogany walls, leather chairs, and a view of the skyline all whispered wealth and power. It was here that budgets were decided, expansions approved, and the very culture of Oak Valley shaped. As Victoria entered, conversations hushed. Board members rose slightly in respect before resuming their seats. Sophia Lynn, the youngest trustee, smiled warmly. Harold Bennett, the elder statesman of the group, gave a curt nod. At the far end of the room, Richard Sloan stood confidently, briefing the members on efficiency measures and policy enforcement. He didn't notice Victoria at first. He was too busy basking in his own voice, too assured that yesterday's humiliation had cemented his control. "Good morning, everyone," Victoria said calmly as she moved to the head of the table. The effect was immediate. Sloan's voice faltered. His eyes widened. For the first time in 24 hours, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Chairwoman Langston," Harold Bennett greeted, his tone formal. "We didn't expect you so early, especially given that my son was in your emergency department last night." Victoria finished for him, her voice crisp but even. "Yes, I thought it best to attend." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Sloan's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Madam Chair, I had no idea your son—" Victoria raised a hand, silencing him with practiced ease. "Mr. Sloan, let's save the excuses. This board deserves the truth. And the truth is, last night Oak Valley failed." The silence was heavy, charged. Sloan shifted on his feet, suddenly aware of how precarious his position had become. Victoria's gaze swept the room. "We brand ourselves as a place of excellence, compassion, and integrity. Yet I watched as your administrator refused care to a child, dismissed confirmed insurance coverage, and attempted to coerce a parent into signing away liability. If it can happen to me, someone who knows this institution inside and out, then imagine how many families without that knowledge have been turned away." Sophia Lynn leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "You're saying this isn't an isolated incident?" Victoria met her gaze. "It's not. It's a pattern. When enabled by arrogance and hidden behind the language of policy," Sloan found his voice. "Madam Chair, with respect, procedures exist for a reason. If we bend them for one family, we'll open the floodgates. People will exploit the system." Victoria turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. "Procedures protect patients, not profit margins. And they certainly don't give you the right to humiliate families in crisis." The words struck like a gavel. Around the table, several trustees exchanged uneasy glances. Sloan's carefully constructed image was crumbling. Victoria straightened, her tone softening, but carrying more weight than before. "For years, I've served this board to ensure Oak Valley remains a place of healing, not exclusion. I never imagined I'd have to fight that battle for my own child." Her voice caught slightly, the only crack in her armor, and it was intentional. She wanted them to feel the human cost of Sloan's arrogance. Marcus is just one boy. But last night showed me that Oak Valley has lost sight of its mission, and I will not allow that to continue. Harold Bennett cleared his throat. "Madam Chair, what do you propose?" Victoria's gaze never left Sloan. "Accountability. Immediate and undeniable." Sloan stepped forward, desperation seeping into his tone. "Wait, this is unfair. You can't hold me responsible for—" "Yes, I can," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp as steel. "You're the administrator. Every policy, every denial, every humiliation falls under your leadership. And as chairwoman, it is my duty to hold you accountable." The boardroom was still, the moment suspended like a held breath. Sloan opened his mouth to protest again, but the look in Victoria's eyes silenced him. It wasn't anger alone, it was authority, earned through years of service, sacrifice, and leadership. For the first time, he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Victoria Langston wasn't just another mother demanding care for her child. She was the woman who ran this hospital, and she had just declared war on everything he thought untouchable. As the meeting adjourned, Sophia Lynn approached Victoria quietly. "You've been patient for a long time, haven't you?" Victoria gave a small smile. "Patience is the most powerful weapon when you know the right moment to use it." She gathered her papers and walked out, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Behind her, Sloan remained frozen, the weight of his arrogance pressing down heavier with each passing second. The reveal was complete. Now it was only a matter of time before the consequences followed. Victoria Langston left the boardroom with her head high, but inside she was already calculating. Sloan's arrogance had exposed him, but arrogance alone wasn't enough to remove a man who had carefully entrenched himself in the hospital's machinery. If she wanted to dismantle him and the toxic culture he represented, she couldn't rely on outrage or titles. She needed evidence, allies, and a strategy that would withstand scrutiny from every angle. She started with documentation. Back in Marcus's hospital room, she opened her laptop and began to type. Every word Sloan had spoken, every denial, every attempt at humiliation, she recorded it in meticulous detail. Timestamps, witnesses, names. Her years as an attorney had taught her that memories fade, but records endure. Nurse Allison knocked softly before entering with a chart. "How's he doing?" she asked, nodding toward Marcus, who was sleeping peacefully now. "Stable," Victoria replied. "Thanks to Dr. Ortiz, and to you." Allison hesitated, then lowered her voice. "What happened last night? It wasn't the first time. I've seen families pushed out because they couldn't pay up front. Sometimes they had coverage, sometimes they didn't, but the way it's handled, it's cruel." Victoria studied her. "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" Allison's eyes flicked toward the hallway, fear written across her face. "If Sloan finds out—" "He won't," Victoria assured gently. "Not until it's too late for him to retaliate." "I promise." After a pause, Allison nodded. "Then yes, I will." By the next day, Victoria had begun assembling a small but determined coalition. Dr. Samuel Ortiz, though weary from years of fighting uphill battles against administration, agreed to help. "You'll need more than stories," he said grimly. "You'll need data. Admission records, denial rates, patient demographics. Patterns they can't dismiss as anecdotal." "Then we get them," Victoria replied. Sophia Lynn, the progressive trustee, offered to quietly access board reports. "There's been talk of budget surpluses that don't add up," she revealed. "Money saved on denied claims. If we can connect that to Sloan's directives, it'll paint a damning picture." Piece by piece, the strategy took form. Still, Victoria knew they were up against an entrenched system. Sloan wasn't a fool. His arrogance was shielded by years of careful maneuvering. He had friends on the board, donors in his pocket, and a reputation built on efficiency. To dismantle him, she had to move with precision. Late one evening, she sat at her kitchen table, Marcus asleep upstairs. Papers spread across the surface. She reviewed every board report from the past 3 years, highlighting discrepancies, circling numbers that didn't align. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was the kind that toppled empires. Her father's words echoed in her mind, words he had spoken when she was just a girl, facing her first brush with injustice. "Justice isn't loud, baby girl. It's steady, it's patient. It's building a case so solid that when you finally speak, no one can deny the truth." She smiled faintly. He would have been proud. Meanwhile, Sloan sensed the ground shifting. He doubled his rounds in the hospital, presenting himself as the picture of leadership. He shook hands with donors, reassured skeptical board members, and whispered about hysterical families trying to manipulate the system. To the untrained eye, he looked untouchable, but beneath the surface his empire was fraying. Nurses whispered about the chairwoman's confrontation. Doctors traded glances when Sloan entered the room. Even the clerks at reception, once cowed into compliance, began to question whether his policies would stand much longer. Victoria's silence was strategic. The more Sloan dismissed her, the more reckless he became, and recklessness would be his undoing. One afternoon, she convened a private meeting in her office. Around the table sat Sophia Lynn, Dr. Ortiz, and Nurse Allison. Each brought something vital. Sophia with internal reports, Ortiz with medical justifications, Allison with first-hand testimony. Victoria laid out her vision. "This isn't about one boy or one administrator. It's about a culture that prioritizes image over care. Sloan is a symptom, but removing him is the first step to changing the system." Sophia leaned forward. "If we're going to bring this public, we'll need airtight proof." Victoria slid a folder across the table. "We have it. Denial rates show a disproportionate impact on low-income families and families of color. Pair that with Sloan's directives, Allison's testimony, and Ortiz's medical recommendations. We have a pattern," Ortiz nodded. "Enough to trigger oversight from the state health department." Allison's voice trembled slightly. "And enough to protect families who can't fight back." Victoria's eyes softened. "Exactly." That night she walked through Oak Valley's lobby alone. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the chandelier light, but she saw them differently now. Not as symbols of prestige, but as mirrors of hypocrisy. How many families had stood on this very tile, humiliated as she had been? She paused at the engraved mission statement on the wall. Excellence, compassion, integrity. Her hand brushed the cold stone. "We're going to make those words mean something again," she whispered. The next morning, Sloan called an emergency meeting of senior staff. Rumors had reached him. Rumors of investigations, whispers of Langston gathering evidence. He tried to project calm, but his voice wavered as he warned, "Do not share internal documents. Do not discuss cases outside this room. Anyone caught leaking information will face immediate termination." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Fear had once kept them silent, but now fear of Sloan was being replaced by something stronger. The knowledge that change was coming, and it was coming fast. By the end of the week, Victoria had everything she needed: documentation of her son's case, data proving systemic abuse, testimony from staff, and support from key trustees. The pieces were aligned. All that remained was timing. She could strike quietly, dismantling Sloan in backrooms with legal maneuvers and board votes. But quiet resolution wasn't enough. Not after the humiliation she had endured. Not after the countless families who had suffered silently. This needed to be public, visible, unmistakable. Victoria. Langston was ready to move from strategy to confrontation, and Richard Sloan was walking straight into the trap she had laid, still convinced he was untouchable. Richard Sloan's office sat high above the city, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of gleaming towers and bustling streets. It was the kind of office designed to intimidate. Sleek furniture, mahogany desk, and framed photographs of Sloan shaking hands with governors, mayors, and philanthropists. For years, this view had been his kingdom. But on this morning, as he paced the carpet with a phone pressed tightly to his ear, the city below looked less like a conquest and more like a battlefield. "Of course the numbers are accurate," he said sharply. "Do you think I'd sign off otherwise? This board has no idea how close we are to surplus collapse. If Langston digs any deeper, the donors will panic." A pause. Sloan's eyes narrowed. "Then we make sure she doesn't dig. Tighten access. Shred what needs shredding." He ended the call and tossed the phone onto his desk. For the first time in years, sweat beaded his forehead. The first attempt came disguised as courtesy. That evening, Victoria received a call at home from an unfamiliar number. On the other end was the hospital's general counsel, a man with a soothing voice and practiced politeness. "Chairwoman Langston," he began. "Administrator Sloan wanted me to reach out personally. There seems to have been some miscommunication about your son's care. To that end, we'd like to offer a settlement." Victoria's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "A settlement?" "Yes," the lawyer continued smoothly. "Oak Valley is prepared to cover all of Marcus's medical expenses, including any future treatment, and issue a formal apology letter. In return, we'd ask for your discretion in this matter. No press, no legal action, no escalation. A private resolution." Victoria let the silence stretch. She imagined Sloan pacing in his office, certain that money and paper could erase humiliation, certain she would take the bait. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "Tell Richard Sloan that my son's dignity is not for sale. And neither is mine." She hung up before he could reply. The second attempt was intimidation. 2 days later, as Victoria walked across the hospital parking garage after visiting Marcus, a black sedan pulled alongside her. The window rolled down to reveal Harold Bennett, the elder trustee. His expression was grim, his words low and urgent. "Victoria, you're making a mistake." She stopped, facing him squarely. "Exposing corruption is never a mistake." Harold leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Do you understand who Sloan answers to? The donors who bankroll this hospital, the politicians who praise him for efficiency, they'll come after you. They'll smear your name, question your leadership, and the board won't protect you. Think of Marcus. Think of your legacy. Victoria's eyes were cold steel. My legacy will be defined by the truth, not by fear. If you're so worried about your seat at the table, Harold, then maybe you should step aside. His face darkened, but she walked on, heels clicking against the concrete. Unshaken, the third attempt was pure arrogance. That Friday, Sloan requested a private meeting in the boardroom. Victoria agreed, knowing it was another move in his desperate game. He greeted her with his trademark smirk, though it faltered slightly under her steady gaze. "Victoria," he said smoothly, "we've had our disagreements, but I'd like to resolve this amicably." "Amicably?" she repeated. "Yes." He leaned across the table, lowering his voice. "You've built a reputation as a fair, reasonable leader. Why tarnish it by dragging internal disputes into the public eye? Think about what the press would do with this story. A board chair attacks her own hospital. It doesn't look good for you." Victoria's tone was ice. "This isn't about optics. It's about families who are denied care because of your arrogance. It's about the culture you've created here." Sloan's smile hardened. "Careful, Victoria. I've survived board challenges before. You're not the first to try, and you won't be the last. But if you keep pushing, you'll find yourself isolated. Respected leaders fall every day. All it takes is the right narrative." She leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. "The difference is, Richard, I don't deal in narratives. I deal in facts. And the facts will bury you." For the first time, Sloan looked away, but his desperation only grew. Behind the scenes, he instructed his staff to destroy records, files labeled pending, statistics on denied claims, internal memos about undesirable patients. He called in favors from donors, urging them to pressure the board. He even floated the idea of creating a new patient responsibility policy, framing his cruelty as reform. Yet every move he made left footprints. Whispers of document shredding reached Victoria through Allison. Donors, instead of blindly siding with Sloan, began to ask why he was suddenly so defensive. Even Harold Bennett, though reluctant, couldn't ignore the mounting unease. Victoria's strategy was working. Sloan was unraveling in plain sight. One evening, as she reviewed another stack of documents at her dining table, Marcus padded into the room in his pajamas. "You're still working?" he asked softly. She looked up, smiling. "Always." He leaned against the chair, watching her highlight lines of data. "Is it because of me? Because of what happened?" Victoria placed her pen down and pulled him close. "It started with you," she admitted. "But it's bigger than that now. No one should feel the way we felt that night. Powerless, humiliated, afraid. I won't stop until that changes." Marcus nodded slowly, pride flickering in his eyes. "Then don't stop, Mom. Make them listen." Her throat tightened, but she kissed his forehead and returned to her papers. He was right. She wasn't just fighting for him. She was fighting for everyone Sloan had silenced. By the end of the week, Sloan launched his final gambit. He called an emergency executive session of the board, hoping to corner Victoria before she could reveal her evidence. His plan was simple: frame her as a reckless chairwoman blinded by personal grievance, push for a vote of no confidence, and end her career in one stroke. As the board members filed into the room, Sloan wore his most confident expression. He believed he had set the stage perfectly, but what he didn't realize was that Victoria Langston had already turned the stage lights onto him, and soon the entire city would see what he truly was. The boardroom was unusually full that morning. Not only had every trustee answered the summons, but a handful of senior physicians, patient advocates, and even representatives from the state health department had been invited as observers. Sloan had expected a small, controlled meeting. Instead, he walked into a stage set for spectacle. He tried to hide his unease, smoothing his tie as he took his seat. Across the long mahogany table, Victoria Langston sat at the head, her expression calm, almost serene. That composure unsettled him more than open hostility would have. "Thank you all for coming," Sloan began, forcing authority into his voice. "I've called this emergency session because we must address a dangerous precedent. Our chairwoman, while undoubtedly acting as a concerned mother, has blurred the line between personal grievance and institutional governance. If we allow Administrator Sloan," Victoria's voice cut through the room like a gavel. She didn't raise it, but every head turned. "You may sit," she continued. "This session is not about me. It's about Oak Valley General and whether we still stand for excellence, compassion, and integrity." A murmur swept the room. Sloan clenched his jaw and sat. Victoria rose, a stack of files in her hands. "Last week my son collapsed and was brought to this hospital. What should have been a straightforward admission became a lesson in humiliation and negligence. Insurance was confirmed, yet Administrator Sloan refused testing. He mocked my knowledge, dismissed my pleas, and attempted to coerce me into signing liability waivers. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate abuse of power." She slid the first folder across the table. "But Marcus's case isn't the only one. Over the past 3 years, Oak Valley has denied or delayed care for over 200 families with valid coverage. The majority of those families were low-income or families of color. This is not coincidence. It's a pattern." Sophia Lynn leaned forward, scanning the documents. "These numbers are staggering." Dr. Ortiz stood, adding his voice. "As a physician here for 20 years, I can confirm what these numbers suggest. Orders are ignored, tests are delayed, and administrators second-guess medical decisions in the name of policy. Patients suffer. Some die. We've been silenced long enough." Sloan shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't cherry-pick data and call it proof. Hospitals make difficult choices every day. We have limited resources." Victoria interrupted, raising another folder. "Then explain this. Oak Valley's budget surpluses have grown every year under your leadership, while patient complaints of denied care have doubled. Where did those savings come from, Mr. Sloan?" She placed the folder on the table with a thud. "From families who were turned away, from children who went untreated, from lives you gambled with to pad financial reports." Gasps rippled through the room. Sloan's confident mask began to crack. Nurse Allison stepped hesitantly into the room, invited by Victoria as a witness. Her voice trembled, but she spoke with courage. "I've worked here for 7 years. I've seen parents beg for tests while administrators refused. I've seen patients discharged without care. Last week I saw Mrs. Langston treated with the same cruelty I've seen countless others face. The difference is she has the power to fight back. Most don't." Her words landed with a quiet force that no statistic could match. Sloan's desperation boiled over. "This is a setup. She's manipulated staff, twisted numbers, staged this entire show because she didn't get special treatment for her son." Victoria's eyes locked on his. "Special treatment? No, I wanted equal treatment. The same respect owed to every patient who walks through those doors. And if you think exposing corruption is a show, then perhaps you've forgotten what your job is supposed to be." She turned to the board. "This isn't about me. It's about Oak Valley's future. Do we condone arrogance, cruelty, and cover-ups? Or do we return to our mission of healing and integrity?" The room fell silent. Then Harold Bennett, who had once warned Victoria to back down, cleared his throat. His voice was heavy with age and regret. "I opposed you at first," he admitted. "I thought you were reckless. But looking at this evidence, hearing these testimonies, I was wrong. Sloan, you've shamed this institution." Victoria's eyes softened briefly before hardening again. "The choice is yours, gentlemen and ladies of the board. Do we lead with fear or with justice?" Sloan made one final desperate attempt. He slammed his hand on the table, voice rising. "If you remove me, donors will flee. Politicians will attack. This hospital will collapse under the weight of your idealism. I'm the reason Oak Valley thrives." Victoria's voice cut through his rant, calm and final. "No, Mr. Sloan, Oak Valley thrives in spite of you." She lifted a final document, signed that very morning. "The State Health Department has already been notified. Oversight is coming. This board can either lead the change or be forced into it. I suggest we lead. The vote was swift, almost anticlimactic. Hands raised one after another, first Sophia, then Harold, then nearly every trustee around the table. Effective immediately, Victoria declared, her tone solemn but resolute. Richard Sloan is removed from his position as hospital administrator. The words echoed in the chamber. Sloan sank into his chair, pale, his kingdom collapsing around him. Victoria closed her folder and looked him in the eye. This isn't the end, Richard. This is the beginning of accountability. The boardroom erupted, not in applause, but in murmurs of awe and relief. For the first time in years, Oak Valley's leadership had chosen justice over arrogance, and the city would soon know it. News traveled fast. By the next morning, Oak Valley General Hospital was on every local news broadcast, its pristine reputation now entangled with words like discrimination, denial of care, and boardroom ouster. Clips of Victoria exiting the board meeting, her chin high and her voice calm as she confirmed Sloan's removal, played on repeat. The story wasn't framed as gossip, it was framed as justice. Reporters highlighted the irony. The very administrator who had denied treatment to the chairwoman's son had been fired by the same woman he mocked. But as more details emerged, it became clear this wasn't just about one incident. Patient advocacy groups seized the moment. Families came forward with stories eerily similar to Marcus's: denied treatments, endless paperwork, dismissive tones, and quiet discharges that left them scrambling to find help elsewhere. Some shared photos of children who had grown sicker after delays. Others brought medical bills they should never have received. Their voices, once isolated, now united into a chorus too loud to ignore. The Department of Health moved quickly. Within days, inspectors were inside Oak Valley, combing through records, interviewing staff, and reviewing denied claims. Preliminary findings confirmed what Victoria and her allies had uncovered: a systematic practice of delaying or denying care to boost financial surpluses. The hospital's glossy mission statement, engraved in marble, became a bitter symbol. Reporters filmed patients standing beneath it as they described being treated like liabilities rather than people. And the pressure mounted. Richard Sloan tried to mount a defense. He hired a high-profile attorney and appeared on a televised interview, insisting that his removal was a political stunt and that he had always acted in the hospital's best interest. But the cracks in his performance showed when asked why so many families, across years, reported the same treatment. He dismissed them as misunderstandings. When pressed on Oak Valley's growing surpluses, he stumbled, redirecting blame to insurers. And when confronted with Nurse Allison's testimony, he accused her of seeking attention. The backlash was immediate. Former allies distanced themselves. Donors froze contributions. Politicians who once praised his efficiency now condemned his leadership. The empire he had built on arrogance and intimidation collapsed faster than even Victoria expected. Meanwhile, Oak Valley began to change. Victoria spearheaded an emergency initiative, the formation of a patient advocacy task force, staffed by doctors, nurses, and community members. Their mandate was simple: review every denial of care, past and present, and ensure no patient was turned away unfairly again. Dr. Ortiz was named its medical director. Nurse Allison accepted a leadership role, her quiet bravery now recognized as the spark of reform. Sophia Lynn pushed for a permanent oversight committee, giving patients a direct voice in hospital governance for the first time in Oak Valley's history. The board, once divided, now rallied behind Victoria. Even Harold Bennett, who had doubted her from the beginning, admitted publicly that she had saved the hospital from moral collapse. But the revelations didn't stop at Oak Valley State Health. Investigators found that Sloan had quietly advised other hospitals in the region on efficiency models, the very practices now exposed as discriminatory. Suddenly, multiple institutions were under scrutiny. The scandal spread, and Victoria was invited to testify before a state Senate committee on healthcare practices. Standing before lawmakers, She spoke not as a chairwoman or as an attorney, but as a mother. "My son was denied care in the moment he needed it most," she told them, her voice steady but charged with emotion. But Marcus is not unique. He is one of countless patients treated as numbers on a balance sheet instead of human lives. If it happened to me, someone with resources and authority, imagine what happens daily to those without. This is not just a policy failure. It is a moral failure. The chamber fell silent. Cameras flashed. Across the state, families nodded, finally hearing their struggles reflected in the voice of someone powerful enough to make change. For Sloan, the consequences were swift and severe. He was formally charged with obstruction of oversight for ordering records destroyed. Civil suits piled up from families wronged under his tenure. His polished image, once celebrated at donor galas, was reduced to a headline of disgrace. Victoria never gloated. She didn't need to. The humiliation he had once wielded as a weapon had turned back on him, sharper than he could bear. The real victory wasn't Sloan's fall, it was the system's shift. Oak Valley's emergency department, once dreaded by families without perfect insurance cards, began a transformation. Signs were posted in bold letters. No patient will be denied emergency care due to insurance status. A new hotline was established for grievances, staffed around the clock. Monthly public reports detailed every admission and denial, with explanations transparent and accessible, and slowly, trust began to rebuild. One evening, weeks later, Victoria walked through Oak Valley's lobby with Marcus at her side. His color had returned, his energy slowly creeping back, though his ordeal lingered in his memory. He paused before the marble mission statement, tracing the words with his eyes. "Excellence, compassion, integrity," he read aloud. Then he glanced at his mother. "Do you think it really means that now?" Victoria smiled softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet. But it will, because we're not done." Her gaze lifted to the engraved stone. For the first time, she didn't see hypocrisy. She saw a promise. A promise she intended to keep for Marcus, for Allison, for every family who had ever felt powerless in a place meant to heal. The revelation had spread far beyond one hospital. It had sparked a movement, forcing institutions to confront uncomfortable truths. And though Victoria knew the fight was far from over, she also knew this: silence had been broken, and once broken, it could never be restored. Months passed, and the memory of that fateful night in the ER faded into history, but its consequences reshaped the future. Oak Valley General was no longer the same institution it had been under Richard Sloan's reign. The marble lobby still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, but the air carried something new: trust. The Patient Advocacy Task Force had become a permanent fixture, reviewing policies with a patient-first lens. Families who once feared humiliation now found allies in the very halls where they had once been silenced. Complaints weren't brushed aside. They were investigated, addressed, and used to reform systems. Nurse Allison, once timid under Sloan's shadow, had blossomed into a confident leader. She oversaw patient relations, her quiet compassion now amplified into institutional power. Dr. Ortiz thrived in his new role, ensuring medical decisions could never again be undermined by bureaucratic arrogance. And Sophia Lynn pushed through a historic policy: mandatory community representation on the board. For the first time, Oak Valley's leadership reflected the people it served. For Richard Sloan, there was no redemption arc. He faced lawsuits, investigations, and the permanent stain of disgrace. His name, once engraved on donor plaques and gala invitations, was erased from Oak Valley's walls. When journalists asked Victoria if she felt vindicated, her answer was always the same: this was never about one man. It was about a culture. And cultures can change if we're willing to fight for it. At home, Marcus continued to recover, his strength returning with each passing week. But the experience had left its mark, not as trauma but as purpose. One evening, as Victoria prepared dinner, Marcus placed a brochure on the counter. It's for the new student health advocacy group, he explained shyly. Some friends and I started it. We want to make sure schools and clinics treat kids fairly. We called it the Equal Care Initiative. Victoria's eyes welled with pride. That's incredible, Marcus. You're turning pain into progress, he shrugged, though his smile betrayed his pride. I learned from you. You didn't just sit there when Sloan tried to push us out. You fought back. So now it's my turn. The Langston name, once just another family in Oak Ridge Heights, became a symbol. Newspapers referred to the case as the Oak Valley Turning Point. Civic groups invited Victoria to speak about accountability. Mothers quoted her words to school boards. And patient advocates across the state cited her testimony in campaigns for reform. But for Victoria, the legacy wasn't about recognition. It was about the quiet victories. The mother who no longer had to beg for her child's treatment. The father who no longer feared being handed a bill larger than his mortgage. The nurse who no longer trembled under an administrator's glare. 1 year after Sloan's removal, Oak Valley held a rededication ceremony. The lobby was packed with doctors, nurses, patients, and community leaders. A new plaque was unveiled beneath the marble mission statement. It read, "Dedicated to the patients who remind us why we serve." May Oak Valley always honor its promise of excellence, compassion, and integrity. The crowd applauded, and cameras flashed as Victoria stepped to the podium. When I walked through these doors a year ago, she began, her voice carrying through the hall, I was a mother terrified for her son's life. Instead of compassion, I found arrogance. Instead of integrity, I found abuse of power. But I also found something else, the strength to demand better. She paused, her gaze sweeping the audience. This hospital is not perfect. It never will be. But today, we can say with honesty that we are moving toward justice, not away from it. And that is worth fighting for. The room erupted in applause, not for her alone, but for the transformation she had helped ignite. After the ceremony, Marcus joined her on stage. He tugged her hand and whispered, "You did it, Mom." She shook her head gently. "We did it. And we're not finished." They stood together beneath the words carved into the marble wall, words that finally rang true. That night, as Victoria sat on her porch overlooking Oak Ridge Heights, she reflected on the journey. Her father's wisdom echoed in her heart. Justice isn't loud. It's steady. It's patient. He had been right. The fight hadn't been won in shouts or single victories, but in persistence, in refusing to be silenced, in choosing the right moment to strike. Marcus sat beside her, notebook in hand, sketching plans for his advocacy group. She smiled, realizing that the legacy she built wasn't just in boardrooms or policies. It was in him, in his determination to carry the torch forward. "Do you think people will remember all this in 10 years? Marcus asked suddenly. Victoria looked at him, her eyes soft. "If they don't, you'll remind them. That's what legacy is. It's not about being remembered yourself. It's about making sure the lesson never dies. And so the story of Oak Valley didn't end with Sloan's fall. It continued in the hands of nurses who spoke up, doctors who refused silence, families who demanded fairness, and a boy who decided his voice mattered. It continued in a mother who had turned injustice into transformation. Not just for her son, but for a community that finally saw change, and it carried a message that would outlast the moment. Echoing in hospitals, schools, and homes across the city, stand firm, speak truth, demand justice, because when we do, even the most powerful systems must bend. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.